I can start. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for waking up early this morning and being here with us. We don't have a moderator for this session, so we're trying this really innovative way of like self-moderating ourselves. So we're going to start with introductions. So do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Okay, you can hear me. So I'm Ryan Remklauwen, co-founder of the Innovation Exchange Coalition, which is a diplomacy platform around innovation, which the State Department and the Organization of American States leverage. And basically we bring delegations of ministries of economy, ambassadors, and then also other innovators to different regions around the Americas to kind of promote innovation, kind of expose the founders to new markets, and help different ministries kind of cross-collaborate on good practices. Little background on myself, I was a medical device founder for many years, and then got into politics by an appointment that I served under the Secretary of Commerce of the last administration, and got into kind of innovation, ecosystem collaborations from governments, and now I just focus on the diplomacy perspective of innovation.
So I'm originally from Chile, and I moved to the US 10 years ago. And because I was really active in the innovation and tech ecosystem back home, naturally, I started helping startups enter the US market with a huge failure rate. We were not preparing the startups. I was not preparing the startups. And when I mean they were not prepared, I'm saying that I was receiving emails like, hey, Ale, I need to raise $2 million. Can you introduce me to an investor? Like, yeah, sure. Like, who are you? What do you do? What are you going to do with that 2 million? And they answer like, here's my website. You can take some ideas from here. Or I was asking, hey, can you share your one-pager with me? And they were like, sure, here's my deck. I think you can build a one-pager with that. So I realized that they needed training. So after some years of collecting data and things changing, we were able to build innovation programs. So I'm Alejandra Winter, and I'm director at GEC, where we have worked with a lot of governments over these years to connect and help their startups and their ecosystems enter new markets. So we've supported more than 500 startups up to date. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Luis Rodriguez. I come from Spain. I work as a research director in a small boutique innovation company in Spain called Barrabés. We started as the first e-commerce team in Europe back in 1994, and from that in 2000 we spin out an innovation company to help others to facilitate innovation. We work mainly with big corporations in Spain and Europe, public administration, and we help them within the Open Innovation Framework to work with the startups, foster innovation, and from the perspective of research, we are working also with the European Commission, analyzing different aspects of the European innovation ecosystem, the fragmentation, the venture capital industry, and how can we recommend policymakers to foster the connectivity among different ecosystems in Europe. Thank you.
I'm Annika Pearson. I also moved here 10 years ago from Germany, and initially joined the team that built up the life sciences vertical for German Accelerator out of Cambridge at GEC, so we have a connection there. I'm now the CEO of Star2 Group in the Americas. We still run German Accelerator on behalf of the German government, more specifically the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. We also run programs for US government. We run programs for many governments around the world. We have offices in 18 different ecosystems, in Asia, in the Americas, specifically because we're in the US now. In the US, we are based out of Boston, New York, Miami, Boulder, and Palo Alto, soon San Francisco, because that's also a very dynamic ecosystem that changes a lot. And what we sort of started out to do is to help international companies get a foothold, do a soft landing in the US market. Why is that important? And maybe that we can open the discussion with that question. I think it is really important. Like, we get that question all the time, right? Like, why don't you just send them into Mass Challenge, Techstars, Y Combinator, you name it? You could collaborate with those guys. We have a lot of startups that went through those programs, and there is a very specific set of issues you're facing when you're an international company that is really a scale-up and not a tiny little startup, and you're trying to break into a new market, right? You have an established business model, you have traction, you have a lot of things in place, and yet you come into a new ecosystem where you know no one, you don't have that sort of peer-to-peer type of reference where you can just ask someone, you know, in your friends group or your co-working space or whatever, and just see, oh, like how can I do this, right? How do I hire the right people? How do I scale my company? Like all of these different questions. All the way to like, you know, regulatory issues and just navigating all of these challenges from a very different perspective. And maybe I'll open it up with that, and we start again with Ryan. Could you talk a little bit about like why is it hard to cross borders as an entrepreneur? What's the role of policymakers, governments, any other stakeholders in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so there's a whole group of issues that you have to deal with. I think probably most of us know there's going to be like legal structures and, how do you enter the market? Like, where do you go exactly? So in my experience, I found a lot of companies are like, of course we want to expand into the US or, say a US company expanding in Argentina, for example. But just understanding the market dynamics is like one big issue. You can't use the same sales strategy, cultures are different. And so from like a policymaker perspective, or I'll just say like the government's perspective, that's a big educational opportunity for the local government to help the founders understand, hey, this is how the market works, here's a market analysis, things like that. So I think, founders coming in without the understanding of how the business dynamics work is really a big issue. And I think the second part is, what's your first step? Like you could go to a Mass Challenge or a Y Combinator, but again, that's like a very different set of being helped versus, like Annika mentioned, you're ready for sale. So like, how does that work? All the way down to like, pricing could be completely different for your product from your country to the next country. And I think those are some of the challenges that we try to help with. But it's, it's a big lift and you have to be really strategic on how that data is given to the founder. So one is exposure to the market, like through a roadshow. The other one is the tactile response to these very specific nuances for scaling your business. Pass it to the rest.
So explain a little bit, I'm gonna go back one step to explain what CIC is. So CIC stands for Cambridge Innovation Center, and we were born 25 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts, across MIT, which is one of the most innovative places in the world right now, but it wasn't 25 years ago. So at CIC, we design and operate innovation hubs. These are beautiful buildings where under the same roof, we put the ecosystem together. So we bring the investors, we bring the accelerators, we bring the startups, we bring the academia, even the corporates, even the researchers. So we're under the same roof. And when we're talking about these buildings, I'm talking about buildings that are 5,000, 15,000 square meters. And if I'm not wrong, in square feet is 50 to 200, if I'm translating correctly. So they're huge buildings where we concentrate all of this. We're in Europe, we're in the US, we're in Europe, we're in Asia. In each one of these buildings, we have like 500 startups. Since inception, we have had 11,000 startups. We're in 11 cities. In 5 of those cities, we're the biggest innovation hub of that country. Our startups under our roof have raised, since inception, $40 billion. So we build a community where we want the startups to arrive. So we do these bridges mainly through 3 big programs, I would say. So one is the soft landing program, which we collaborate with a government to actually expose their ecosystem through their startups in a new market. So we train their startups, we put mentors for their startups, we introduce them to potential clients, we bring them for an immersion week in one of our locations. And in these locations, we introduce them to the network. But then the startup has to leverage those connections and to bring them back home. So a second step would be a country desk, where we put those governments embedded in our communities. So I always call it like an innovation embassy for those countries, where actually you're not looking from far away what's happening, which are the trends. They're actually building that ecosystem, and they're part of these trends, and they're leveraging the network for their startups and for their country. What we also do is Venture Cafe. Venture Cafe is an event that happens every Thursday in 14 cities at the same time. In each one of these cities, we have like 300 to 600 people each night. And the communities that are coming from abroad are inserted into this. Why is this important? Because the collaboration happens with trust, and trust comes with consistency. So if you come every Thursday to the same place, you get to know the people, you get to trust them, you get to collaborate with them. And we do it locally, but we also do it when we're bridging different ecosystems.
Okay, I will try to give a bit of a European taste here. There is a word Alejandra just said that I like a lot. They build bridges at the CIC between ecosystems. From the perspective of policymakers in Europe, I think they try a lot to foster the connection among ecosystems in Europe. But there is a risk in policymaking that when you build a bridge, you are really transforming that bridge in a wall. And from my point of view, policymaker oriented toward fostering innovation and startup ecosystems should be focused on breaking down that walls. We analyze in our research ecosystems from the point of view of complex systems. So in complex systems, there is a property called emergence that when you change a tiny bit of part of an system, you are creating unexpected consequences. So in Europe, fragmentation is very relevant. The fragmentation in Europe equals 45% tariff in goods and 110% tariff in services. That's the tariff we are imposing ourselves into our companies, into our startups, and into our ecosystems. So if you try to build things, you need to break down those barriers and create a common infrastructure and a shared pool of resources.
To me, that's such an interesting conundrum, right, in Europe, because, you know, we get, and everything, all Europeans who live in the United States get that question a lot. It's like, why do you guys not get your act together? And obviously, you know, if you look at all the rifts between different states in the United States, you have sort of a comparable situation. But I think there's sort of a interesting question in that, and that's what do borders actually mean to a startup, right? Can you really build a German company, a Spanish company, maybe you can build a US-only company, at least for a while, because it is a huge market. But especially if you look at certain industries, right, like biotech, either your company is global from day one, or like what are you even doing with your time and your money? The reality is also that there are tons of regulatory, legal, and barriers, and they're all the softer barriers that you try to solve with the soft landing. And there's only so much you can do by building those communities, by facilitating those cross-border activities, which is why it is important, right? Like on the face of it, with German Accelerator, for example, our task is to bring German companies, to the US, to Singapore, India, you name it. The reality is also that a very important role in that, because we are the people on the ground facilitating that, is that I see a responsibility to feed those learnings back into the system back home, right? And sort of, not necessarily give policy advice, but at least sort of a reality check and say, okay, those are the challenges we see. We speak to hundreds of startups every year, and they tell us these are their top 5 challenges in their home market. These are their challenges going abroad. Some countries make it hard for you to leave, right? Which is also a weird concept, because most companies that internationalize don't leave their home market. What they actually do is that they expand. The pie gets bigger. You may only retain a slice, but that slice becomes more relevant. How do you experience that sort of pushback in your daily life where you kind of see, okay, are we facilitating brain drain, or are we hemorrhaging our home economies?
From my perspective, I do think that's a challenge. Like, there's a level of being competitive between ecosystems and countries, right? But so far, I think the main issue that I've seen is the companies coming to, say, from LATAM to the US and not thinking about, like, what you mentioned. Like, you don't have to necessarily move your entire organization. You can have a satellite office or use the soft landing pad and not necessarily show that you left your country. And I think there's a lot of founders who are, worried about that, especially if they raised funds from wherever they're from and came here. So we kind of help think through that strategically, and how do you talk about it from like a marketing perspective, and the politicians like that as well, because it doesn't make it feel so competitive along the way. I think the other issue that we deal with is there's a lot of founders who aren't even considering moving across borders or opening up a branch or just selling. So we spend a lot of time kind of reverse talking to them about it on that strategy, and also looking at the bigger expansion in that particular country and how their talent set can then stimulate that economy. So we try to make sure that whenever we're taking founders wherever they're going, that we bring the local innovators there as well for them to meet. So it's not just them connecting with customers and investors, but to the greater ecosystem. And I think it creates the optics of collaboration, and it helps the founders realize there's a talent pool, and then helps the local founders feel like they're getting more support because a bigger company is coming, sharing mentorship and advice. So we kind of take that intentional extra step.
I think that support networks in ecosystems are very relevant for founders. I think that 35%, if I remember properly the data, 35% of founders are willing to relocate their company in order to get more support network for their companies. And that means that you need to get some kind of support to cross-border operations, which are always tricky, because I was discussing previously with another person from GEC, and for example, if you want to make business in Europe, you need one tax manager per country. You need to address multiple regulations, different in 27 countries, and sometimes more than in 27 countries for each region. And that means a huge compliance cost for companies that cannot, particularly SMEs, that cannot afford.
I think it's interesting to analyze that there's different phases. So since we have been supporting startups, we've seen that, 10 years ago, they were really, really scared of entering big markets. So it was trying to convince them that actually they can do it, and preparing them and like make the startup readiness of like understanding the culture and insert them in the community. But then there's a lot of cash flow, and we realize that so many people show up in different countries with like, hey, I removed the kids from school, I'm ready to move into a house, and I have no plan, no idea what to do. Because there was a lot of investment at the moment. So it was like trying to slow them down into making a really smart move into the ecosystem. Now we're back into like being a little bit scared, but understanding that they have to move. We usually work though with governments. So the question is also like, I'm trying to build my ecosystem. So why should I support these startups to go out if we're going to lose them? And the reality is that we don't want the countries losing them. It's important for each one of the countries. If you're building an ecosystem to, yes, have local startups starting, but also you need your startups to grow. You need your startups to go outside. I always like the story about like Rappi in Colombia, which is a unicorn. So Rappi raised an amount of money that it's more than the money that the government raised usually for highways or bridges or infrastructure for the country. And that money actually made the company bigger, so created more jobs. After 5 years, all of the IT department was ready, they're millennials, so ready to actually leave the company and build 10 new startups that are really, really good. So actually Rappi going outside, raising money, having a new network was a really good injection of talent and money into the ecosystem. So we're working with all of these governments to actually help their ecosystem grow locally, but also connected to the other cities.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. You can't just sort of collect the startups and send them abroad, right? It's not as simple as that. You need to do the ecosystem work on the ground for your startups because they need to reach a certain sort of size. They need to be able to scale to a certain level in their home market or home region to then even have the resources to launch in a market like the US. The US, and I think the US is especially interesting, right? Like I mentioned a couple other countries where we are also active. The US is sort of a special animal for multiple reasons. A lot of startups want to come here for fundraising. That is not the reason why you go to, Argentina or, India or like lots of other places where we send startups all the time that are much more about sort of finding new customers, for example, or partnerships or outsourcing manufacturing, or you have it, right? But like, you can send startups here, right? Like, you can organize a delegation, you can spend a week in Silicon Valley. Up to you whether you would want to take the thumbs up picture in front of the Facebook campus, right? I think that can be inspirational and fun, and we see that with some of the university collaborations where we bring in international students. And of course, they want to, do a tour of the Stanford campus, talk to some innovators, and they take something from that. But once you have a scale up, like how do you connect them with the real ecosystem, right? Like the right corporates, the right investors. Especially challenging in a place like Silicon Valley or New York or Boston that is so oversaturated that no one has waited for you, right? We have one mentor who always tells the group when they come in, it's like, no one cares about you but your mom. And people are a little shocked by that initially. But there's something to that, right? Like our job on the ground is to make people care. Like, why should I spend my time on meeting with that startup? We heard a lot yesterday about the give first mentality in Boulder. I live in Boulder. I experience that every day. But the reality is also that Boulder isn't exactly overwhelmed by international startups in a way that Silicon Valley is. And so the real challenge for us is like getting deep enough into the network that we are able to make those meaningful connections. And that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile spending some time. We also run market discovery programs, for example, for startups to come in and have sort of an initial experience, understand, is that the right market? Are there potential customers for me? Am I up to the job, right? Is that something I really want to do? But once you've done that, you really need to go in deep, provide a lot of support to those founders and make sure that they talk to all the right people in the right way. And that's just a process that takes some time for most founders. Obviously, you always have sort of the natural-born unicorn founders, serial entrepreneurs, and so on. But the reality is also that in most of the world, there aren't that many serial entrepreneurs. Part of our goal is to create more of those, right? And we see that now after 10, 15 years, we have people coming back with their second or third startup. So there is that sort of positive effect on the home ecosystem, but it takes time to create that.
Yeah, so I'll add to that, like you're saying, immersion into the ecosystem as a roadshow, and you're going to do the, visiting the Googles and, having a cocktail party, that kind of thing. I found it very valuable to make sure in those like collaborative, like say networking events or cocktail parties, having a lot of the local founders from that community. We found more success from founders to founders, like the visiting founders interacting with the local founders and them collaborating. Maybe not from like the startup to startup perspective, but the local founders, they know a lot of the contacts and a lot of the, the corporates and things like that. And they've been like pre-introducing the other founders together. And we've actually tracked that, and that's been more successful than me having the corporate, whoever it is, there at the cocktail party, trying to integrate in. You have to do all of it, but I don't know if that's like an obvious thing they see, but if you look at how founders network, it's different than how we're networking. And we've made a significant amount of progress with first helping the local ecosystem introduce with the other founders, and that local ecosystem helps support the incoming founders. It could sound kind of competitive in some way between the startups, but typically that's not the way that it kind of pans out. So if you are doing that, it's just a way to expand on the roadshow. I just wanted to throw that out there.
You wanted to go? Other way that we've seen that we could start bridging and helping the startups is also we receive a lot of corporates sometimes that arrive to a place saying like, we're in the healthcare ecosystem, but we are not in the health tech. So they also bring their challenges. So a Japanese company coming to the US and they have specific challenges, and then we help with the scouting of the startups that could solve those challenges. We do it like sometimes to private research, so like we're scouting for those, or sometimes by sourcing them in like open challenges. The most effective ones that I really, really enjoy is the one where we have presence in both places. So we have a Japan desk in Cambridge, but we have a whole building also in Japan. So the interaction from one place to another is really effective because you are constantly building community in both places. We have also a program in between London and Japan, where again, like we're sending Japanese companies to London and from UK to Japan, and then they're connected directly to the end with the end client, so, and they're testing their POC. So at the end, like it's really effective the way that we're introducing them into the communities.
Regarding the connection between different ecosystems, there is an interesting point regarding the culture. The challenges the challenge that represents different cultures. I think we are all here from different countries, so we probably know. And for example, GEC works connecting Japan with the States, which are very different cultures. But I read a story the other day. I think it kind of went viral about a founder in Europe that had created a kind of a Airbnb 1 year before Airbnb. And he kind of ended up selling the company because he couldn't take that to success in Europe. It was impossible for him to leverage enough capital to compete with Airbnb once they launched Airbnb. But then Airbnb went to Europe and crashed it, make the success it is today, right? So how in these programs can you help overcome this cultural success? Because there is something cultural there. I complain a lot about regulation in Europe, but it's obvious that it's something different in culture, because one company from the States could manage to success in Europe, but one company of Europe couldn't success in Europe.
Maybe real quick, because we are almost at time to open up for Q&A. I think that's a very important point around, I think actually 2 points, right? One is that we, and I'm now put my European hat back on, we need to get better at celebrating startups and really championing them. And I think there's a role for government as well, for example, by prioritizing startups when you're purchasing new technology, right? Don't just always buy from Microsoft or you name it because you're super risk averse. Yes, it is riskier to buy from startups, but who, if not the government, can afford to take a little bit of risk? That's something we hear from startups all the time, where they're like, stop giving me grants. Please just buy my products, which gives me traction, which helps me with the fundraising, which helps me with everything I do. So I think, there's more, and I see how that has changed, right? I started out working in the startup space in Berlin 15 years ago. And now you think of Berlin as this sort of entrepreneurial hub, like one of the places in Europe to be. I mean, at the time, people were like, what kind of job do you even have? What is that with those startups? So I think things can change quite rapidly if you foster that culture and support it. And if nothing else, don't make it hard for people to do business and build a company. So I think that's a really important point. And yeah, I mean, really, the other point, we briefly talked about it before this panel, is like stop thinking about competition, right? Like building startup ecosystems isn't about competition. It's not one organization against the other. Like, I mean, we are based out of CIC in Cambridge. We are based out of CIC in Japan. We're not competing with the Japan desk, right? We run a program for Tokyo city government to work with scale-ups on the ground and then also bring them to Germany. And of course, there's synergies. If you look for them, there's always synergies. If you look for competition, you'll probably find some. But to me, that is not a mindset that's getting anyone anywhere. And I think that's also the case for Europe, for example. Like as a region, you need to collaborate. And once we understand that and start pushing that more, we will be a lot more successful in this game. Should we open up for questions?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'm happy to get the...
No, they have a microphone.
Oh, you have a microphone? Okay. Got to stay seated.
Hi, I'm Mike from the UK. I'd like to get the panel's opinions on a trend that has come back after dying, which is countries setting up...
Mike, sorry to interrupt you. The speakers are pointing your way, so we need it a little bit
higher
so we can hear you.
Can you hear me? There we are.
I think
Even louder.
We are the ones having the issue.
Oh, right. You can't hear as well.
Yeah, now I can.
There we go. Yeah, so the trend that has kind of resurfaced, which is countries building landing pads, particularly in the US, but increasingly in countries like Japan and in the Gulf countries, where they bring their best companies and put them in a building. In San Francisco, there's a big Japanese building. There's one for Germany. There's one for Italy just opened, Milan, various other things. And that's a trend. I just wondered what your views were on the success factors of those kind of buildings.
Well, I think, speaking for German Accelerator, which is one of those big initiatives you're talking about, I think it's not necessarily a trend. We've been doing that since 2013 in Silicon Valley, and it has to decidedly not be a trend or a short-term initiative. It is a long-term commitment. We've now, helped multiple companies become unicorns. Our companies have raised almost $17 billion. We had a lot of exits. So but building that kind of success actually takes time and a lot of commitment. And that's, to the point earlier, right? It's how deep do you want to go in, right? You can just do a delegation trip, or you can have a building, right, or some sort of presence. A lot of countries have one person on the ground who's then tasked with make introductions, which, is challenging. So you need to build that network, the infrastructure. There's a lot of things you need to have in place in order to really help facilitate, connections, and also, provide all the mentorship the companies need to make good use of these resources. And the UK is a great example, right? I was just at South by on a panel with the Midlands. Didn't even know where that was, right? It's like Birmingham, okay, heard of that, right? And like half an hour into that thing, I was like, just use that flag on the wall, right? The Union Jack, people know that. Yes, you don't want to be in the same bucket with the people in London, I get all of that. Please leave those differences at home. And when you go abroad, collaborate as much as you can, right? And it's the same for Europe, right? Why isn't there a European initiative? And if you talk to anyone in government, I've done that before, it's like, well, we would be open, but the others don't want to do it. But the reality is also, like, there are a lot of countries that people in the US have never heard about, right? Fortunately, a problem we don't have on the German side that is, somewhat known. At the same time, we also see when we do a pitch event, for example, in Silicon Valley, together with other countries, with Portugal, with the Netherlands, you name it, immediately there's more interest, right? Because people go like, oh, there's like a European presence. And so I think if you want to, and just talk to people in Texas, and they're like, yeah, we don't want to talk to a state in Germany. We want to talk to the federal government because that's sort of eye level for us, right? So you kind of, I think, need to think more about how do we represent ourselves better elsewhere, even if you're squabbling at home.
If I can add, I think it's when you arrive to a place, and we mentioned it before, like, you're very important wherever you're coming from. People know you, you have a network, and you arrive and you know nobody. You know nothing. Nobody knows you. Your credentials actually don't validate you because you have sold to like these big corporates that nobody knows in this new market. And I think like having that support from people that are from like your same countries, your same culture, etc., like really helps. But the first mistake is staying there, because actually you have to break those barriers. Because, and I have examples of those people that arrive to the US and they come into the Chilean community, which by the way, we're not a big country, so we don't have a lot of immigrants also in the US. And at the beginning, they're like, oh my God, I'm making so many sales. Like, I'm like really crushing it. Like, it's amazing. But then he sold to the whole Chilean community, and that's it. And also, like, we talk about the cultural barriers. If you are surrounded only by people from your culture, you don't start like actually understanding the cultures where you have like to sell and to be able to understand the marketing and to understand how to negotiate with them. So if these landing pads are completely isolated, I think it's not a good trend. But if they're inserted in a bigger community, like what we have, so like if like, yeah, there is a Japan desk, but also like the German has a office there, etc. Like, it's great. Like, you are surrounded by people that you trust and you know, and you feel like you can have a little bit of your culture, but then you cross the door and you can interact with the other community where you also have to start creating relationships with.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rajiv Hiralala, and I come from a country that is the most forested country on earth, and we're also one of the few carbon negative countries. So we have carbon to spare. I was trying to figure out how, for example, if we would want to build a carbon credits-based ecosystem in our country for innovation, how we would go about it, and with which countries we would potentially partner for a cross-border type of relationship. I was just wondering how you would handle this type of case.
Which was the challenge? Can you repeat it?
So we're trying to build a carbon credits-based
okay.
innovation ecosystem, and I was just wondering how we would, from the perspective of cross borders, which country should we partner with, or how would you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it's a challenging question, but like, for example, there's going to be nations like like my initiative, we're going to be in Brazil, and Brazil is openly talking about not necessarily carbon capture, but using other terms around climate and sustainability, right? One way is looking at their websites, their ecosystems, like if they've got accelerators and things, and looking at if they're recruiting companies in that space. That'll kind of like start putting you in a path of good research. Like, okay, these are the 4 countries that has a budget, or they're doubling down on that market, and that might help you pick where to go, and that'll then further help you figure out where you should interact, what corporations, it could be an accelerator, it could be corporations like ours, but that's like, a way to kind of leverage the data that's available to help you identify the country. How to make that market, I don't know, like you'd have to just integrate in and figure out, how that would work, but that's as much as I could probably advise on that.
Something that we're doing is like, I talk about what CIC is, which is like our agnostic, I would say, campuses, so a lot of like different things. We also do the industry specific, and we have some examples in robotics, in biotech, so climate tech, that is like specific people doing that. And then we have another ones that we call focus campuses. So both of the last examples I think could work. Is like understanding what you want to specialize in, what type of equipment, secret sauce, or what is needed for people to say, you know what, they're the only ones that actually can help me solve this problem. Or maybe you have the customers who are actually going to buy from the startups that are solving this. And then if you have the customers, if you have the specific equipment, like you can start attracting companies from all over the world because they want to be in the place where they have the equipment and the customer to actually be able to sell their products.
Thank you. Good morning, Jerry Bleman from the Caribbean Center for Organizational Excellence. I wonder if you can share from your experience the extent to which technology has served as an alternative cost-effective bridge and accelerator for ecosystem building across borders.
I mean, so for example, like ChatGPT, right, or any of the AI engines like that, that's made a significant impact for local ecosystems. And so, like in India, there's a whole organization that's just using ChatGPT to teach local founders all the general, like it's basically like a free accelerator program on ChatGPT, because a lot of those founders can't get into programs or there isn't any program available. And that's like almost changing their economy from founding groups that would have never surfaced. And then some of those companies are now not just crossing borders locally, but using that as a data aggregator, figuring out other programs like ours, and finding programs. So you don't have to so I guess the best way for me to say is that technology is allowing access to information from a startup learning perspective, but then also giving them access to finding corporations like ours. So I think that's been an interesting way for technology to help expose local founders into cross-borders opportunities.
Kia ora. I'm Dave Moskowitz from New Zealand, and I just wanted to make a comment on the landing pad phenomenon. We had the Kiwi landing pad in San Francisco for about 8 years, and it wasn't terribly successful because for a small country like New Zealand, we don't have all of the resources that you need to provide a sustained support broadly across the entire ecosystem. So eventually we closed it down. But my question for you is, what's the one bit of advice that you would give an entrepreneur before market entry? Because what we find is people go, oh yeah, we're going to go to the States, or we're going to go to London, we're going to go to Europe, and they get on a plane, they fly over there, and that's great. But often it's with inadequate preparation. So what's the one piece of advice that you would give to founders to explore before they enter a market?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned it, is the pre-work, like how do we prep them before they get there? And so we end up spending a lot of time on market analysis, understanding the landscape, and pre-connecting them to other founders, and that's been like a big value, because it allows in your scenario, like the New Zealand founder, to understand that local ecosystem from a founder's perspective, which really helped them navigate. And then like they started getting invited to separate events and separate cocktail parties versus the ones we're just hosting. So kind of like monitor how fast, like how much we're helping them as the soft landing or the facilitator, and how the ecosystem can pull them in. So it's one step understanding the corporates that are available, the investors and things like that, but that's just one journey. The other journey is like really adapting into the ecosystem, and they can only do that by almost building their own network. So during our like prep calls, we almost bring other founders onto the calls to be like, hey, this is so-and-so, it'd be great for you guys to have one-on-ones. And that kind of goes off in that direction. Obviously, they're like very, very vetted founders, and they understand the process. And then the other side is really understanding how the numbers work. And I know I said this before, the pricing is always an issue that I've seen. They're selling their product in their country for whatever the price is, totally different pricing strategy in the US or other countries. And a lot of times they'll get to a point where they're like, now we have this opportunity to submit a proposal, and the numbers are so off that it never goes anywhere. But you don't get feedback from the corporate or the purchaser. It's just like, oh, I don't know, this is just too high. But like, well, how high is too high? How do you math that out? So we help them try to do that, but usually they're not thinking about that. So it's a re-strategy of the sales process is the other takeaway, I think.
Thank you for the great discussion. I'm Masaru from GEC in Japan, and I'm helping many startups to go to abroad. And in Japan, Japanese government is putting a lot of effort to support Japanese startups to go abroad. They partner with many accelerators around the world, including Start2 and GEC, and they're having many programs. But I'm just wondering what else Japanese government or any other government can do more than just running programs. do you have any like a success case that governmental body, including like federal level or state level government, make great job to support startups to go abroad?
Can you repeat, please? I didn't
Sorry,
get the
I
question.
can repeat it, and I'm gonna skip the answer because
Okay.
we're colleagues. But if we like beyond collaborating with accelerators, what other case examples or successful stories you can share about how to support Japanese startups going abroad? Sorry? Collaborating with the government.
Yeah, role of the government. Is there any success case like a governmental body support startup go abroad?
No, I just give an example that everyone can look up later. So there's an organization that I help run called the America's Competitiveness Exchange, which is through the organization American State Department, EDA, and a variety of branches. And we pull a bunch of governments together. What we did as that entity was decided to showcase founders so basically we pull 20 or 25 different country leaders together and then highlight the founders by letting them present. Obviously it's very strategic on industry and things like that. But then what happens there is that we basically gave them a pedestal and promote them. So the governments are pushing like, hey, we found this really interesting innovation. Like they can't really like invest or really do that much because of like the level of their kind of diplomatic relations. But highlighting it through that platform from governments, I think is really powerful for founders. So a lot of founders use that as leverage to raise more capital because then the VCs are like, wow, look at that. All these governments are supporting you. And that's a loose term of what support means, but using the power of that kind of political position to highlight founders is really valuable. So that's one way that you could do that.
I think we have to close it. So
1 minute and 40 seconds left.
It's over.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we can do like one quick closing, but thank you very much for coming. The reality is that going abroad, it's not only about business, it's about communities. So build those communities, not only locally, internationally. And if you have any questions, we can chat outside.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.